They both caused the Queen a lot of anguish in the last years of her life. It's one thing I will never forgive the Sussexes for, is the amount of stress they caused the Queen. Well, I do remember what the Queen said at one point was, I'm not sure she used these exact words, but basically, sort of one minute he's Captain General of the Royal Marines and the next minute he's just a childminder. I think she felt that, that he deserted the ship. He could have done much more. He also was doing a very good job before he left Chaos. I suddenly found a copy of Hello magazine. There was Prince Harry smiling like mad. Heavens, what's this? And then I looked at the date, 2015, pre-Meghan, I wonder, I mean, it's so difficult to work out what's really going on in his head, but as far as I can see, he wasn't that unhappy until his wife came along and told him he was unhappy. That's my reading of it, but that may be unfair.
Yeah, and what do you think of this? I remember at the time, at one point when Harry came to visit the Queen and he gave this interview saying that he needed to check that she had the right people around her, which I found very imperious. I mean, what do you think she made of that?
She was exasperated, I imagine. I mean, I do know that whenever they visited, she made sure that she had her lady in waiting with her so that they couldn't take photographs and use them.
There is a quote, not from a tabloid, not from an anonymous source, but from one of Britain's most respected royal historians, a man who spent decades studying Queen Elizabeth II up close. He said, "It's one thing I will never forgive the Sussexes for, the amount of stress they caused the Queen." Let that sit for a moment. Not a social media commentator, not a rival royal, a scholar, a biographer, someone who dedicated his life to understanding this woman. And that is the word he chose: never forgive. So what exactly happened behind those palace walls? What did the most disciplined, most composed monarch in modern history actually endure in her final years? And why are the people closest to her still, to this day, struggling to put it into words? If you want more deep dives like this, make sure you subscribe to Royal Archives. We go where the mainstream press won't. Because here's what most people aren't saying out loud. Queen Elizabeth II made a promise in 1947. She was 21 years old, standing on a broadcast, and she pledged her entire life, every year, every decision, every private grief, to the service of her country. And for 75 years, she kept that promise without breaking, through wars, through scandals, through the death of her husband, through her own failing health. She kept going. But in her final chapter, in the years when she should have been sailing, as one royal insider put it, into sunlit uplands, something shifted. The serenity she had earned wasn't waiting for her. Instead, there was chaos, and a significant portion of that chaos had a very specific origin. Let's go back to 2021. The Oprah interview aired on a Sunday night in March. By Monday morning, the entire world was talking.
But quickly escalated to claims of racism within the royal household.
Claims of racism within the royal family, allegations that a senior member had expressed concerns about the skin color of Meghan and Harry's unborn child, suggestions that Meghan had been denied mental health support, that she had felt trapped, isolated, pushed to the edge. The palace responded in 3 sentences. But what was the Queen's private response? That's where things get complicated, because publicly she issued a careful, measured statement. Recollections may vary. That phrase, now famous, told you everything and nothing at the same time. It was the Queen operating in her highest diplomatic register, calm, controlled, non-escalating. But behind the scenes? Multiple sources close to the household have since described a woman who was deeply saddened, not just by the content of what was said, but by the manner in which it was said. Publicly, on American television, before the family had any opportunity to respond privately. And here's what's raising eyebrows even now. Harry had visited the Queen before the interview aired. There are reports, unconfirmed but widely circulated, that the full scope of what was about to be broadcast was not made clear to her in advance. Whether that's true or not, what we do know is this: the Queen watched along with the rest of the world as her grandson dismantled the institution she had given her life to, in front of an audience of tens of millions, That's where things stopped making sense. Because this was not a disgruntled former employee. This was not a distant cousin or a peripheral figure. This was Prince Harry, the boy she had watched grow up, the grandson she had championed, the young man who, just years earlier, had been photographed smiling at royal engagements, looking, by all accounts, genuinely content. Royal biographer Hugo Vickers, a man who sat next to the Queen at dinner, who read the private letters of Prince Philip, who has studied this family for over 60 years, made a pointed observation. He said that, in his reading, Harry wasn't particularly unhappy in the royal family, until his wife came along and told him he was.
Chaos. I suddenly found a copy of Hello magazine. There was Prince Harry smiling like mad. I thought, heavens, what's this? And then I looked at the date, 2015, pre-Meghan, He wasn't that unhappy until his wife came along and told him he was unhappy. That's my reading of it, but that may be unfair.
That is a significant thing to say. And Vickers wasn't finished. He recalled a moment that struck many royal watchers as deeply revealing. Harry, during one of his visits to the Queen in her later years, gave an interview in which he suggested he needed to check that she had the right people around her. Vickers called it imperious, and the Queen? She was exasperated.
I remember at the time, at one point when Harry came to visit the Queen, and he gave this interview saying that he needed to check that she had the right people around her, which I found very imperious. I mean, what do you think she made of that?
She was exasperated, I imagine. I mean, I do know that whenever they visited, she made sure that she had her lady-in-waiting with her so that they couldn't take photographs and use them.
So much so that whenever Harry and Meghan visited, she made sure to have her lady-in-waiting present. Specifically, according to those close to her, so that no photographs could be taken and later used or reframed in media appearances. Think about what that means. A 90-year-old woman, a monarch, having to strategically position her own staff before receiving her grandson, not out of ceremony but out of self-protection. Something about this doesn't add up. Because the narrative Harry and Meghan presented to the world was one of abandonment, of being pushed out, of a family that refused to help. But the picture emerging from those closest to the Queen tells a different story, one of a grandmother who kept reaching out, who kept her door open, who, even as her health declined and the weight of a global pandemic pressed down on the monarchy, continued to absorb the blows, quietly. And there was Andrew too, because it wasn't just Harry. In those final years, the Queen was carrying two impossible situations simultaneously, and the weight of both was visible to anyone paying attention. But Harry is where the public conversation has stalled, because the Oprah interview was just the beginning. After that came the Netflix documentary. Then came Spare, the memoir that named names, revisited private conversations, and placed the entire royal family under a microscope in a way that had never been done before by a serving or former senior royale. And all of it happened while the Queen was still alive. That detail matters more than people realize, because there is a significant difference between a tell-all released after a monarch's death, when the institution can regroup, reframe, and move forward, and one released while she was still on the throne, still carrying the weight of the crown, still showing up. Some online discussions have suggested that the sustained pressure of these public revelations, the interviews, the documentaries, the book deals, contributed to a visible decline in the Queen's energy in her final year. That is impossible to verify, but what is documented is this. In the months before her death, she was visibly frail. She had withdrawn from several major engagements, and those around her described a woman who was, for the first time in her reign, showing the strain. She made it to her platinum jubilee. 96 years old, 70 years on the throne. She appeared on that balcony, and the crowd roared. 2 months later, she was gone. And the question that keeps coming back, the one that royal insiders are still sitting with, who is this? In her very last years, when she deserved peace, when she had earned stillness, did the people she loved most deny her that? The answer, it turns out, is more complicated than either side of this debate wants to admit. And that's exactly what we're going to get into next. Here is something that rarely gets discussed in the flood of Sussex headlines. Queen Elizabeth II was not a woman who broke easily. She had survived the abdication crisis as a child. She had lived through the Blitz. She had watched her marriage tested, her children's marriages collapse publicly, and her family name dragged through decades of tabloid scrutiny. She did not flinch, not once, not publicly. So when people close to her started using words like anguish, that means something. That is not a word the royal household reaches for casually. Hugo Vickers, whose access to this family spans generations, was direct about it. He said the Queen found the whole situation bewildering. That 1 minute Harry was Captain General of the Royal Marines, a prestigious military appointment, a role that carried real weight and real purpose. And the next, in her words, he was just a childminder. That is a devastating thing for a grandmother to feel about her grandson. And yet, and this is where the story becomes genuinely complicated, there are those who argue that the institution itself must carry some responsibility, that the royal family's notoriously closed culture, its silence in the face of press attacks on Meghan, its institutional slowness to adapt, created the conditions that made Harry feel there was no other option. Some online discussions have centered on this exact tension, whether Harry was pushed or whether he jumped, whether Meghan exposed real cracks in the monarchy or widened ones that were already there. But here's what gets lost in that debate. Whatever the cause, whatever the sequence of events, whatever private grievances were real and whatever were amplified, the person absorbing all of it, quietly, without complaint, was a woman in her 90s. A woman who had already given everything. A woman who, as one of her closest confidants revealed, told a friend just 10 days before she died that she felt like she was in the departure lounge. She knew she was leaving, and she was at peace with it. But was she at peace with everything else? That is the question that lingers, because in those final months, the Queen was not just managing Harry and Meghan, she was managing Andrew, an entirely separate catastrophe that demanded its own enormous reserves of energy and discretion. She was navigating Boris Johnson. She was absorbing the aftershocks of Brexit. She was doing all of this while her mobility declined, while her hands showed the strain of age, while the walking stick she had resisted for years became a permanent fixture. And still, she showed up. That's the thing about Elizabeth II that even her harshest critics have never been able to dismiss. She showed up every single time until the very end, which is precisely why what happened in those final years cut so deeply for those who loved her. Vickers put it plainly. He said it was such a pity that the Queen should have been able to sail into those final years celebrated, honored, surrounded by the legacy she had built. Instead, she was managing crisis after crisis, family fracture after family fracture, right up until her final constitutional duty, saying goodbye to Boris Johnson, offering him the kind of steady, wise counsel she had offered prime ministers for 7 decades. Don't be bitter. Don't let it get you down. 2 days later, she was gone. And now, with some distance from that moment, a clearer picture is beginning to emerge. The Sussex situation did not destroy the monarchy. The institution held. King Charles stepped in with a grace and steadiness that surprised even his harshest critics. The transition, for all its grief, was smooth. The crown endured. But the personal cost, the cost to one woman in one set of private rooms, reading the morning papers, and watching interviews she was never consulted about, that cost has never fully been tallied. Hugo Vickers is not alone in feeling what he described. Among longtime royal observers, among household staff, among the quiet circle of people who actually knew her, there is a shared and unspoken grief, not just for her death, but for the final chapter she was handed. She deserved better. That is not a political statement. It is not pro-monarchy propaganda. It is simply the view of the people who were there. And perhaps the most revealing detail of all, the one that says more than any interview or documentary ever could, is this. When Harry and Meghan visited in those final years, the Queen made sure her lady-in-waiting was always in the room, Not for protocol, not for tradition, for protection. A grandmother protecting herself from her own grandson. If that doesn't tell you everything about the cost of what happened, nothing will. The full story of what Queen Elizabeth II endured in her final years is still being written. Royal biographer Hugo Vickers' book, Queen Elizabeth II, goes deeper than anything that has come before. 600 pages of documented history, private correspondence, and the kind of access that simply does not exist anywhere else. The question of whether Harry and Meghan will ever fully reckon with the impact of those years remains open. The question of whether the public will, that one is up to us. If this video made you think twice about the story you've been told, subscribe to Royal Archives. We'll keep pulling the thread. Because with this family, there's always more beneath the surface. Always.